Right, and so on to paper 1, question 4, which is my favourite question, and this really is the one that separates the best students from the lower ones, but it is accessible and reachable to all if you just follow these key points I'm going to go through with you now. Now, just like the others, if you click the link below, you'll see this source and you'll see the exam question as a whole. So I'm knee deep in my exam by this point, and I've turned over to question 4. Now straight away, the biggest difference here is this one's worth 20 marks, which is the same amount of marks as question 1, 2 and 3 put together. So I've got to give it my all, I've got to give it a fair amount of time, hopefully around about 25 minutes. Now I'm going to focus my analysis here, making sure that I don't go on and on and on. I'm probably going to have 3 good solid piece paragraphs here, but they're going to be fantastic quality to make sure I get the lion's share of those marks. Now the examiner has not been kind here. They've given you an awful lot of words to deal with, so we have to pick apart exactly what they want. It says focus this part of your answer on the second part of source lines 26 to the end, so I can sack off the first part of the source. I don't need to worry about that anymore. I'm just worrying about line 26 to the end. And now it's going to give you a statement. It's going to give you a lens to focus on, an argument that you need to then agree or disagree with. So a student, having read this section of the text, said this battle is an upsetting and emotive read. The writer brings to life the chaos and the barbarity of war. My first challenge, I need to fish out from that statement the focus of the analysis. What is it the examiner wants me to argue about? And in this case, it wants me to argue whether it is a chaotic and barbaric situation. Now, logically, it is easier to agree here, and most of the time it is easier to agree. So we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But the key thing that students miss here is that second bullet point. Evaluate how the writer has created these impressions. It doesn't just want you to agree or disagree and say why. It wants you to tell the examiner how the writer has gone about doing that. So how do we do that? There is basically now a whole raft of writer's choices they could have made. Now we've already discussed quite a lot of these in question 2. We've talked about techniques already, we've talked about words, and we've talked about sentences. And if you look at my question 2 video, I've talked about how you can analyse them really specifically and clearly as well. So we're not going to worry about those right now. But the other whole bank of terms we can worry about now is all the other non-language choices. Things like these I've got on the screen now. Now these are all choices that the writer has made in the creation of their little piece of narrative that we've got here, and we can dip into these and examine how these have also informed our understanding of whether this is a barbaric and chaotic war. Now most of these on the board you should be worried, should be aware of, you should know these already. Something like narrative voice and tone might be quite new to you. What I mean by that is about the tone of the narrator. What are they panicked? Are they worried? What are they like when they're describing this action? But also narrative distance, that's the proximity of the reader to the action. Are we far away from it? Or are we literally scrutinising the blood pouring down his face? How close are we? The others should be quite familiar to you. If not, you need to go away and make sure you are familiar with them before you tackle this question 4. Basically, you are always going to agree, but I'm yet to see one of these statements where it's easier to disagree than it is to agree. So take the stress out of deciding whether you're going to agree or not. You're going to agree, and you're looking for an alternative argument as well. If you can give that alternative argument, that's going to show you to be a more perceptive, more argumentative student and be able to challenge these ideas. However, don't make it harder for yourself by doing that all the time, because you're going to deny yourself the obvious points. Now, there's nothing wrong with finding the easy points, because it's about the quality of your analysis. So now we need to find our rich quotes. I would go through the source, and I found these ones here that I've got on the left here. I invite you to now also go through the source and find the quotes you would have that show this to be a barbaric and chaotic situation. Now once I've got my quotes, and you need to bear in mind these are rich quotes again, I've got loads and loads of other quotes that I could have found, but I've chose these ones because there's really clear language choices that I can talk about here. Once I've got my quotes, I can now do my introduction. Now my introduction is short and sweet, and mine would look like this. Here in our introduction, we're essentially introducing our argument. We are saying why we agree, however, the one reason why we would disagree. So I agree to a point that Faulks brings to life the chaos and barbarity of war, for we are showing the physical destruction of land and man, the powerlessness of the advancing soldiers against the enemy's guns, and the psychological impact of the attack. However, Faulks also shows that from the chaotic barbarity there is peace and solitude. So can you see how I've colour-coded my points in my introduction from my quotes? Because I've based my introduction on the quotes that I've already got. Now I've given my examiner almost a little guided route through most of my answer now. They know that my next 3 or 4 paragraphs are going to talk about these key focuses and based on these evidence. And most importantly, I've established my argument right at the outset. So now if I'm going to start analysing language, I'm going to follow exactly the same rules and prompts I did with question 2. If you want any more information on that, go to the question 2 video, but I'm going to assume that you have, so I'm going to crack on. Now it comes to my write-up. So this is underneath my introduction, and I'm after a minimum of 3 of these, but ideally 4. So first of all, I'll give my point. Folks demonstrates that barbarity ensues because of the powerlessness of the advancing soldiers, who were hurled up like waves breaking backwards into the sea. Look how I have not given a technique or anything like that, but I've given a reason why I agree, what my reason is for agreeing with the statement. And I've also started off with Folks' name because I need to show to my examiner that I know this is a creation of Folks and that Folks is making me feel a certain way about this war through his choices. Now I'm going to explain, and in my explanation I'm inferring what I learned about this barbaric war. So waves that break are at the end of their journeys across the ocean and are often small and insignificant to us. Therefore, Folks shows us how these soldiers have come to the end of their personal life journeys and their death is not a concern to anyone now. So I've talked about how that quote shows that it is a chaotic and barbaric situation. But that's as far as I go, not zooming. Now I get cracking on the writer's methods. The verb hurled connotes to being carelessly disregarded, reflecting the ease at which the British soldiers were disposed of by the German guns. Furthermore, the distant and nonchalant narrative voice here suggests an acceptance from the narrator of the barbarity he sees. He's become so used to it he is no longer disturbed. That italicised bit is what's going to mark me out as a top student who's going to do well, because 1, I've not just given one method but I've found another one, and 2, I'm not just talking about language all the time, I'm talking about non-language choices, I'm talking about the narrative voice that's been adopted, and 3, I still link it back to wherever it shows as barbaric and chaotic. Now I'm not going to stop there. Some people will and they'll move on, but I'm going to start expanding it a little bit further. However, the simile of waves is key, for waves are never ending and the sea will always erode and destroy physical barriers that eventually, therefore Folks may suggest that no level of barbarity will ever stop the soldiers. The sea is also usually associated with images of peace and tranquility, therefore implying a peace and beauty that comes with this barbarity, for this short-term bloodshed will pave the way for a victory that will allow peace and prosperity into the future. Now I'm getting good because I've looked at all the multiple interpretations that I've explored, all the different language and non-language choices that I've talked about, but I'm also offering more perceptive points by arguing and discussing with myself. Here I've used the evidence to examine how it is both barbaric and chaotic, but how there is also a peace and a tranquility that comes with that barbarity and that chaos. So I've looked at both sides of the argument. Now you're probably looking at this and thinking, I can't do that for 4 paragraphs in 25 minutes, that's madness, and you're right, and you don't need to. You're showing the examiner that you can do it. I would make my first paragraph look like this, be really discursive, be really thorough, be really perceptive, and in my next ones, I haven't got the same pressure to match that same level because I've probably already got the marks in the bag. Now if I was going to get my mark scheme out now and look at that, you can't argue this is not a perceptive and detailed paragraph. I have evaluated critically and in detail the effect. I have shown a perceptive understanding of writers' methods and a variety of them. If I did that for another 2 or 3 paragraphs, I would have a range of textual detail, and I have got a convincing and critical response to the focus of the statement, which has been established by my introduction and then embellished and developed throughout my analysis.